This program is brought to you by the Georgia Neurosurgical Institute. For over 50 years, rendering neurosurgical care to patients of all social conditions, treating complicated problems involving the brain, spine, spinal cord, and peripheral nerves, endeavoring to encourage quality care, medical research, innovation, and education on a local, national, and international basis.
Good evening. My name is Joe Sam Robinson. It's my pleasure to have with us once again tonight the famous Dr. Buck Melton. Buck, welcome.
Glad to be here, as always.
Now, I recently read some of your articles in The Atlantic, and I actually have to say they were very, very erudite, well written.
Well, thank you.
And the subject was impeachment. And I wonder if you're trying to open the doors somehow to get up there in the vice presidential arrangement. I mean, maybe encouraging conversation along those lines and just kind of clearing the deck, have the runway cleared out, because presumably, if President Trump is impeached, there'd be an opening, the vice president would move up, and there'd be a vice presidential opening. Is that on your mind at all?
I could not possibly comment.
Okay, well,
I'm sorry, I just can't. I can say nothing about it. You should stop agitating this issue, or you could destroy some very important plans.
I won't.
I could not possibly comment.
I won't go there. Well, okay. So you actually, it's fair enough that you really are quite an excellent observer on these arrangements.
Well, thank you.
What do you think is going on now with the impeachment circumstances? It's pretty unusual, pretty strange, pretty bizarre. What's going to happen next as we speak tonight? The Democratic House of Representatives has not turned over their impeachment articles to the Senate. The Republicans said, we've already decided we're going to not do anything here. They're not going to call any witnesses. It's going to be sort of, I don't know, kind of in a way, a fiasco, the whole thing. Comments? How does this comport with the Constitution, the events of the past? Any thoughts about that?
Well, yes, how long do we have to answer this? Well, impeachment obviously goes back hundreds and hundreds of years in Anglo-American history, and it sort of organically emerged. We have to remember that when Parliament began, it was not two houses. It took centuries for you to see a discrete House of Lords and House of Commons. They were often in tensions with each other. To this day, there is still some of that tension, not nearly as much as there used to be, because the Lords have now essentially been subjugated. But bicameralism, the reason we have bicameralism is because it's like a miniature separation of powers. You don't want all the legislative power in the hands of one group of people. So there is supposed to be a tension between the Senate and the House. And this is by no means the first example of that. I think one of the first early examples is when in 1794, 1795, the Senate ratified the very unpopular Jay Treaty with England that George Washington had been pushing. And the Jeffersonian Party hated that. They had fought it tooth and nail, but the Federalist Party had the power to get it through the Senate. But then the House of Representatives, which was coming under the increasing control of the Jeffersonians, said, well, you can't make us pass a law to appropriate the money necessary to implement the treaty. So this is not a new phenomenon, but it's a particularly petty one, especially when Nancy Pelosi and the Democrats have been beating the drum so heavily about their solemn constitutional duties. Suddenly to turn around and start playing blatant politics by saying, but we're not going to give the articles to the Senate until the Senate does what we want it to do. Well, the Constitution says the House has the sole power to impeach, which Pelosi and the Democrats kept falling back on during the impeachment process. They said, we don't have to wait for the courts to rule on anything. We can do this because we have the sole power to impeach. Well, the Senate has the sole power to try impeachments, and Pelosi now suddenly forgets this sole power business and is apparently trying to dictate to the Senate what the Senate must do when it's not up to the House. It's up to the Senate. So
Well,
it's petty, and I have bad words for Mitch McConnell and the Senate Republicans on this as well. They're all behaving in an irresponsible way.
Well, I mean, obviously these are politics. It's an election year.
Yes.
And maybe this is just a delaying tactic. Maybe they have focus groups that are saying, what should we do
Well, they
here?
certainly do, yes.
And it appears the best thing to do is not do anything, because the Republicans will obviously acquit President Trump, and then that might rebound against the Democrats. Maybe their idea is just to let it sit there until the election. I mean, is there ever been a circumstance where nothing happened? You just kept the person.
Some impeachments can go on for years. The impeachment that I'm the most familiar with, of course, is the first federal impeachment, and it took a year and a half to resolve from the moment that Senator William Blount was impeached to the moment that the Senate dismissed the trial was about a year and a half. I'm thinking at this point that maybe Pelosi and the Democratic leadership intend this impeachment to be a kind of hyper or super censure. We voted to impeach. We're just going to leave it at that. We're going to leave that hanging over his head, and we'll never do anything with it again. And so he won't be cleared. He won't be acquitted, and he'll just have to live that down, if only in the history books. I don't know. They were in such a rush to impeach, and now to put on the brakes is
Well, to ask this from a methodological point of view, can the Senate just say, okay, you haven't, whatever the deal is, you haven't handed us the articles that of impeachment, and you haven't provided a list of prosecutors or whatever. You haven't done that. Can we just, are we sort of stuck here? I mean, can we pick people to be prosecutors? I mean, so can the House of Representatives just stop the process right there by not giving to the Senate the list of prosecutors? Say, well, and it's sort of a sham idea to say, well, we're going to demand you do this in the Senate. We're going to make you do what we wish, and the Senate has no intention of doing it. Thus, there will be no trial, and in the meantime, the House of Representatives will not give a list of people that are the prosecutors. Thus, there you are. It's just stuck. There's nothing that can be done, and it'll just stay like that.
I think they can do that. Noah Feldman, professor of law at Harvard, he was one of the four witnesses before the scholarly witnesses before the Judiciary Committee. I was not at all pleased with his performance. Feldman, frankly, is not an impeachment specialist. He's a law and religion specialist, and he really should not have been one of those witnesses. I strongly suspect he was called purely for his partisanship. But Feldman did make a point that I agreed with after that day. About a month ago, he wrote an article, and he said, until those articles are presented by the House to the Senate, there actually has not been an impeachment. Now, that's controversial. I mean, the House has certainly voted the impeachment, so it may be a distinction without a difference to a degree. But the Senate, by my reading, can't do anything. It cannot move this forward until the House shows up and says, here are the articles, we're impeaching him. So it is stuck in limbo for now, and that's on Pelosi's plate.
Let's suppose this happens. Suppose President Trump is reelected, these articles are ready to go, and the Democrats get a substantial majority in the Senate.
Yes.
Could they then say, okay, now you're 3 months into your new term, we now plan to impeach you now. But we wanted to do this. Now we have the opportunity to do it. Is that a possibility?
I see at least two problems with that. The first problem is, and this was a question that was raised during the Clinton impeachment, and it was never resolved, that each Congress is a separately numbered Congress. I think now we are in the 116th Congress? My math is not good.
It's way out there.
116th
yes.
Congress. But a Congress lasts for 2 years, and it's divided into sessions. Today, it's usually divided into year-long sessions.
Right,
so
yes.
we're now in the second session of whatever Congress we're in. We'll say the 116th.
Right.
I may be wrong about that. But next January, about a year from now, the 116th Congress will cease to exist, and a new Congress, the 117th Congress, will come into being. And the question is an impeachment that is voted by one Congress still viable? Does it survive the end of the old Congress and continue into the new Congress? And there's a very good argument that no, it does not. So if that were to happen, I think that Trump's defense people could say that this is a bogus. Essentially, the statute of limitations is expired.
I wonder, I mean, with federal judges, I mean, often it takes a while to get everything done. I mean, it would appear that at some point that's happened. That at some point, there may have been issues along these lines. I'm not sure how they.
Well, for federal judges, it's different because courts don't have naturally expiring terms like that. But let's get through that. There's also a good argument to be made that while the House of Representatives expires every 2 years, the Senate does not. The Senate is a continuing body because of the staggered elections of the Senate.
Yes.
And so you might be able to argue that you can keep the impeachment alive if you go ahead and present the articles to the Senate. So let's say your scenario works. We go to November, the Democrats win a huge landslide in the Senate. The Republican Senate is now lame duck. So in that 4 or 5 weeks in between the landslide and the expiration of the Congress, at that point, Pelosi and the Democrats rush over and present the articles to the Senate,
Yes.
possibly keeping the impeachment alive.
Well, you know, the other point is, I wonder what impact, just to ask this question, impeachment has. So, number one, an impeachment of an imperial president, a person exercising great power, just the fact that Congress did that, maybe that's a check on really executive overreach, just the fact this happened. I'll ask that question.
Toothless tiger. Everybody's shrugging this off, saying, huh? So I would disagree with that.
And the next thing is, having done that, does that inflame the executive? That he's been impeached, it's a real insult to him, and from his personality kind of situation. Is he being goaded into extreme behavior that will be politically damaging? In other words, are the Democrats master psychiatrists, and they've looked at Trump and they've said, well, all we have to do is throw sand at his face, and he'll do something nutty that we can then throw him out. The people will throw him out or will throw him out, and we're going to try and throw sand in his face to make him do something that's fairly extreme, which might be against the country's best interest.
Yes.
He might blow somebody up or whatever. I mean,
Or
not that
carry out an assassination of an
right. It might
Iranian
be some
official
kind of right.
Yes.
Yes, it might. And should Congress be aware of these circumstances? And just to ask this question, do they consider the psychological impact of their decisions with the president? Presumably not,
Yes.
but I'll ask that question.
Well, and I think that they probably have thought through this, and that may be a viable reason why they're trying this. I think that there are a couple of reasons why, if that's what's on their mind, why they should have thought better of it. First of all, his finger's on the nuclear button. If they really think that Trump is an unstable person, and he certainly, whether he's unstable or not, whether or not that's the term to use, he is certainly a loose cannon. He's shown that you have to go back at least to Andrew Jackson to find somebody as volatile.
Whose picture is on his desk,
Yeah,
I think
yes.
he admires.
But Andrew Jackson didn't have nukes. So that's a very dangerous game to play to promote your own interests. And maybe they're thinking that it's in the American interest to get him out by this, but that can certainly turn around and bite us very badly. And if Iran carries out a sarin attack in the subway of New York or the metro in D.C., I'm not sure that the Democrats can be absolved of their responsibility for that at this point. Secondly, even ignoring that, I think the Democrats are not realizing that the people who support Trump, the primarily right-wing white males who support Trump, they're going to cheer him on. This is going to energize that base. You're not going to get them to switch. That's just going to solidify them in their support. So I'm not sure if that's going to have the result that they want.
Well, you know, just going into this complicated story, the president has such an extraordinary responsibilities, is under so much stress, presumably, tremendous stress, tremendous responsibilities, and to have reached this pinnacle there's been a very difficult trip to be there with all kinds of emotional baggage that might have accumulated. So the person that becomes president is often not the most stable of people. I think I could say that. I mean, maybe not. And if a person has all these powers, presumably the 25th Amendment allows the president to be removed for health reasons. And in the earlier, allegedly in the earlier part of his administration, some of the deep state people, to use that term of phrase, were going to try and record some kind of conversations. They will wire themselves up, and they were going, that's the apocryphal story that's out there. There was going to be a coup d'etat with, to basically say, well, you're psychologically a troubled person, and we're just going to take you out with the 25th Amendment. That sounds pretty extreme, pretty complicated. What about that? Could people do that? Could they? And the way that it's done, I think the cabinet has to vote on it and a different...
It's a complicated process. One version is the president himself can say, I don't have capacity. And an example of that might be, I'm going in for surgery, I'm going to be out
Which
for
has
12
happened.
hours. Yeah,
Right.
it has. The other one is that when you get a majority of the cabinet or the principal officers, I think it's called in the 25th Amendment, they tell the Congress, well, this guy's not got the capacity. But then the president has an opportunity to go to Congress and say, those people don't know what they're talking about, I do have the capacity, and then Congress gets to vote on that.
So he could be removed for, I mean, just to say this, and presumably this is not the case, but his enemies would say, well, you have, you know, you have all kinds of narcissistic behavioral difficulties, yes. And unlike many, I'd say most politicians may have that.
Well, there has been a study that says most politicians can check off most of the boxes for psychopathy.
Right,
so, yeah.
But so this guy's very a shaky guy. The process to do that would be extraordinarily political and all. I can't even imagine the tensions that would occur. So the Democrats could, if they had enough cabinet supporters and they wanted to do that, they could avoid going through the Senate, could they not?
Yes. Well, and this is the thing. This is we've seen this with impeachment, and the terrifying thing is that we might see it with the 25th Amendment too. If you look at impeachment, it was designed not to be political. If you have words like judgment and conviction and trial, you know, these are the words of law, not the words of politics. Now you have a political body trying him, but even to get that conviction, you have to have a solid consensus of those politicians. It's got to be a 2/3 vote to convict, and that's very hard to get. So all of those things are designed to depoliticize impeachment. I think if you looked into the 25th Amendment and the history of the 25th Amendment, it was likewise supposed to be apolitical. But with the Clinton impeachment, probably with the Andrew Johnson impeachment, and now with the Trump impeachment, you're seeing it politicized. You're seeing it turned into a political tool. What happens if you do that with the 25th Amendment? Let's come up with some sort of psychobabble that the Democrats can latch on to say he's not competent. I think that could lead to a constitutional crisis. I don't think there's a 2/3 requirement with the 25th Amendment, and that invites politicization. Is that the word?
Yes.
That is terrifying. I mean, that really is an attempt to nullify the will of the people for political gain.
You know, I think of the book and the movie, The Caine Mutiny. Mm-hmm. So the idea,
one of my favorites. Yes.
Right. So the idea is in some ways, the commander, the captain of the ship, has the same kind of extraordinary power that the president has,
yes.
in sort of a micro macro situation. And in the movie and the book, the captain, Humphrey Bogart, I mean,
too old for the role, actually.
Right. Well, whatever. But he was. That's right. But he was too old.
I think that was his last movie. But yeah,
really.
In the original book, he's supposed to be a mid-level officer, mid-30s, late 30s.
He was like a lieutenant commander.
Lieutenant commander. Yeah.
Yeah. So and then he had all these personality quirks, and then these officers said, "Well, you're psychologically, we're taking you out for psychological reasons."
Yes.
Well, supposedly the 25th Amendment has a similar kind of reason behind it, but it focused mostly on health, a person that had a stroke, the Woodrow Wilson story,
yes,
which you mentioned before. The idea that you have a stroke, your wife is running the country, you can't do it, and that was supposed to do something about it, or a person, maybe people have had heart attacks. I mean,
yes.
Lyndon Johnson's had a heart attack. I think the amendment wasn't passed when he was there, or was it?
I can't remember.
I don't think,
but Eisenhower also.
Right. So people have had heart attacks, and when they have heart attacks, they often get substantial pain medicine. The other thing that's out there is you could say, well, Senator McLean ran for president. He had a lot of post-operative pain. He had, and on and on. He took some pain medicine for the wounds that he had. So what happens if you're in that circumstance, just to go through this, impairment, the 25th Amendment is there. Presumably, if you're in coma, okay, it's pretty clear there.
Yes.
If you have terminal cancer and you're on chemotherapy and you're being sedated, okay, all right. And then the other issue would be some kind of cognitive decline that might play a role in this, and I think of Ronald Reagan, a very elderly person there that maybe is not as mental acumen is not as what it was earlier.
There were indications that the assassination attempt did something to him.
Yes, so, that's right.
Yeah, could the difference be between the chronic and the acute? That if we know what we're getting and we elect him anyway, well, deal with it. The people have spoken. But if something occurs, a stroke or something unforeseen, that might be a natural dividing point. I don't know. You mentioned Wilson, and of course Wilson was the first really big example, but it took John F. Kennedy's assassination to really bring the amendment about, because for a while, I think Kennedy was technically still alive. He had respiration, had heartbeat, but there was no way he was coming back from that. Everybody was out of communication. We didn't have the kind of instantaneous communication at that point. And so for a while, you didn't know who was president. You didn't know who could give orders. There was actually a showdown between the Secret Service and the local police. So the Soviets had a window in which they could decapitate us. So do we want to turn that into a petty squabble to control the White House when we don't like what the electoral system has produced? And if you add to that, well, most people voted against him anyway, so we're only doing the will of the people. This is a recipe for coup. It really is.
Yes.
And we really ought to be very, very careful about going there.
So the 25th Amendment has some issues, I think, attached to it. Presumably there's some safeguards in it. But I would make one or 2 points. Point number one is the presidential power, the finger on the nuclear trigger is a spooky set of events. That's point number one. Point number two, in sort of a less acute situation, well, I'm going to start a world war. I'm not going to blow it. I've got time to think about it. I'm going to brood about it, and I'm going to blow up a couple of cities tomorrow. Or I'm going to do something that's going to be so inflammatory that it's obviously going to cascade into a disaster. Well, the checks and balances, I'm not sure how well they work under these circumstances, and what it really requires is a person that's in that position that has been vetted in many ways, health issues, and I don't think, as far as I can see, that the way these presidential figures are vetted, it's not like a board of physicians do this. Instead, it's their private doctor that sends some kind of note out there that
he's in perfect health.
That's right, and so that we're really not getting that assurance. Secondly, I just, I'm not to be too fan of a point on this, but the cognitive ability, particularly of older citizens, is not what it was when they're younger. There might be some issues there. It appears that the politicians that are running are all, not all, but many of them are quite elderly. I mean, I think Trump's in his 70s, and as Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders, they're all pretty elderly guys. They're on different kinds of medication. And is their cognitive ability good enough 24 hours around the clock to pull the nuclear trigger if necessary?
Yes.
And then finally, what about people that are, they have a couple of cocktails every night? If you're, it's like you're on call. I mean, if you're a neurosurgeon, you're on call, you certainly can't consume anything, and they're on call all the time.
Yes, 24/7, 365.
Is there any attention to pain medicine and cognitive ability and alcohol in people that are on 24/7, functioning appropriately for the American people? And does the system good enough to ensure our national interest?
Well, I'm put immediately in the mind of Kennedy, who was mixing the pain medications for his back injury with, he'd wash it down with alcohol, and what do you do with that? This is a classic case where current events have kind of outrun the constitutional language, that the Constitution wants the elder statesman to be president in a time when things are slower and presidential duties are lighter. And today, here we are 200 plus years later, the pace of international and national events move much, much faster. The president has much more power, and our elder statesmen tend to be much older. And despite all of our medical technology, you know much better than I do that the brain degenerates. So how do we rewrite it? Do we put a maximum age limit? Do we require a board of medical examiners? It goes back to a question that I asked in an earlier episode: who watches the watchers?
Yes.
Can it be politicized?
Yes, it's a complicated story, isn't it? Well, and we have the election coming up in 2020.
We're here.
We're in the middle of the electoral season. We have an impeachment out there. We've got terrible tensions in the country. Do you have any solutions for these tensions? How can we get in the same boat?
I hear New Zealand's very nice this time of year.
Really? What can we do to make the country a little easier to drop it a little bit?
I really don't know. I think if you ask me for one solution, it would be, and this is something that we have talked about before, and we both have concern over, this issue of diversity. This deification of the notion of diversity, and our diversity makes us stronger. And as you have liked to point out, and I use this in my class all the time now.
Oh, good.
The root word of diversity is divide. And It's almost Orwellian to say that our divisions make us stronger. Our divisions help our unity.
Yes.
That we need to, without downplaying the fact that we are ethnically diverse, we are culturally, linguistically diverse, in terms of religion we're diverse, that we need to look past the diversity and find what the unity is and use that unity to bring ourselves together. And that's just not the way of modern America. All the forces seem to be centripetal or centrifugal. Centrifugal is to throw out.
Yes.
All the forces now seem to be centrifugal and not centripetal.
Yes.
And I don't know how to fix that, but we need to find a way somehow.
Well, it's a complicated, and I think everyone of goodwill should be trying to get in the same ship.
Yes.
That's going to be an important issue. We all sort of get together, and if we can't do that, the results are going to be catastrophic.
I think the rule of law may be the thing that brings us together, but that's not going to work if all of us are trying to push the envelope for our own faction's short-term gain, like an impeachment and 25th Amendment.
Okay, on that point, thank you so much, Bucky.
Thank you, sir.
Once again, an enjoyable interview.
This program is brought to you by the Georgia Neurosurgical Institute. For over 50 years, rendering neurosurgical care to patients of all social conditions, treating complicated problems involving the brain, spine, spinal cord, and peripheral nerves, endeavoring to encourage quality care, medical research, innovation, and education on a local, national, and international basis.